going on, everybody, and thanks for joining me again. This is the great episode. I've been hyping it up. It's something to get excited about. We're tackling some really great topics. The topic of the day is guns and gun control. And what better person to bring on here than Big Bear Bridgham. Wayne, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm excited to have these conversations, answer some questions we've had from friends and classmates, and have an actual dialogue based around the Second Amendment.
Yes. And honestly, we had some really, really great submissions. So what I think we should declare kind of what we would like to accomplish in this podcast, right? So something that I would like to accomplish in a conversation with you, Wayne, is this topic of guns. What do we do about them? Who's to blame or what is to blame? If we can even siphon that out, which means there's too many, can we at least narrow it down to a couple? And then can we problem solve these issues? So what do we do with guns? Who's to blame? How do we problem solve this? These are huge issues that really nobody has the answers to, but the only way to get to them is to start the conversation.
Absolutely.
So I think I'm going to read two questions that kind of piggyback off of each other. Okay. I think they both pose really great points. First, we're going to start off with Andre, a friend of ours named Andre. Andre, thank you so much for sending this in because this is a great question. So Wayne, as Americans, we have the right to bear arms, yes, and people feel very strongly about that right and how it was included in the inception of our country's foundational rules. However, that was a very long time ago when weapons that we have now are allowed, the weapons that we have now that we're allowed to possess weren't even fathomed of. Also, to that point, as we have grown as a nation, we have gone back to that foundation and tweaked it from time to time just because of how society has developed. So maybe this is one of those laws that could use some adjusting. Does a right to bear arms equal a right to own automatic weapons? I understand that handguns are the most responsible for general homicide, but it is undeniable to see the immense impact that automatic machinery can have in a fraction of the time. That is the difference between homicide and mass murder, the difference between protecting yourself and your family versus senseless acts of violence. I think there's some very legitimate points there, Wayne. We'll move from there before we address Andre's, but it's kind of just the main concept of this may have crossed over or the threshold of we're no longer protecting our family. This is not just taking out your intruder. This is taking out a whole school of people in minutes. So does that ancient law that really didn't foresee this coming still accurately describe the social, implications of where we're at right now? Then we're going to move on to Johnny. So Andre and Johnny kind of have a really great topic. So Johnny, thank you. This is amazing as well. So the vast majority of homicides committed with firearms are done with pistols, so it makes little sense to me why assault weapons in recent years have been the target of gun control advocates around the country. I've heard arguments such as the stock on the weapon allowing the greater accuracy, the size and shape of the rounds for certain weapons that they're capable of firing, allow for a greater propensity to kill, and the idea that they are intended for killing enemy combatants at war, and thus do not belong in the hands of civilians with potentially insufficient training to handle them, nor the need to possess them, because they will not face a foreign combatant in their everyday life. I disagree with all of these premises for one reason or another, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. So that's kind of pushing further Andre's point of, hey, we're not fighting these enemy combatants.
Sure.
Do we really need them? Again, I'm going to hang my hat on probably where your heart lies of like, am I allowed to just enjoy them? Why do we need jet skis, right? Like sometimes they're just fun if you've ever gone to a shooting range. But to get to the very social issue of this, Wayne, like why does the average civilian need the right to own an assault rifle?
Well, so if we get down to brass tacks, I really appreciate Johnny and Andre these questions. Some great points, some fair points. One of the biggest things that we need to keep in mind is that the Second Amendment wasn't put together so that I can go hunting. It wasn't put together so that I could necessarily own whatever firearms I wanted. The Second Amendment, when you read it at what it was written, was put together to protect this country from tyranny of a government. I'll submit to you guys, probably about 2 years ago, we had the Clive and Bundy issue out in the Plain States. That is a perfect example of a tyrannical government, the Bureau of Land Management, that was land grabbing. The Bundys had been grazing their cattle on the same land for a couple of generations. The government came in and said, this is our land, and they told them to get the cattle off it. When they didn't do that, they killed the cattle. Further from there, the government then decided they wanted to arrest Clive and Bundy. There were thousands of gun-toting Americans, Second Amendment, and people who just care about their fellow man that came together and went to Clive and Bundy's property, and it became essentially a force-on-force issue. Law enforcement officers from across the U.S., FBI, DEA, all the high-end agencies in the country responded with their tactical teams, and it was a standoff. The reason it was a standoff was because anyone with a brain could look at that situation and the powder keg and understand that they were on a precipice of terrible situation. Why? Because U.S. citizens were armed with the same level of firepower, for the most part, that their direct opponents, the government, had. It turned the tables a lot, and it brought it to a point where in 2018 a federal judge dismissed all charges against Clive and Bundy relating to this incident. Now, that is the exception, not the rule. One of the big things we have to keep in mind about the Second Amendment is when it was penned in 1776, we as a country did in fact have some foresight and some knowledge of things that were coming. The first repeating revolver was trademarked and patented only a couple of years after the signing of this, which means technology was already moving in this direction. So for anyone who says they couldn't have foresaw these current weapons, I disagree 110%. Soon thereafter, they brought out the first automatic machine guns, which was a Gatling-style gun that fed off of a gravity-fed magazine from the top of the weapon. All these things occurred in relatively short time from the penning of the United States Constitution. What I will submit to you is, let's turn this argument a little bit and let's say, how does the First Amendment extend to social media and to the internet? Because of course, I'll argue with you about whether or not the forefathers of this nation could have foreseen the technological advancements in firearms and the technology thereof. But I feel comfortable submitting to you there's absolutely no way they could have foreseen the internet. Right. There's no way they could have foreseen a level of technology that would have been to that threshold at that time period.
Where we could say literally anything we want in my bedroom and it'll be able to
what we're talking to you on right now.
Exactly.
A camera that records in real time, and we're able to reproduce copies thereof by clicking a couple buttons on a laptop. All these things, there was no way they could have foresaw this occurring. They did the best job they could to pen at least an outline for us as a country to protect ourselves and to grow our way of life.
Right.
Now, I really like, in Andre's point, he talks about homicide and mass murder. One of the things that's not talked about is the definition of mass murder. So the definition of mass murder is a very, very fluid concept. And actually, the United States definition of mass murder is stricter than that of the European Union and the UN. The UN basically terms any incident where there's 2 or more shooting victims as a mass murder. The United States terms it as 4 or more. When these things are brought up and I hear these discussions from people, I love to have these discussions, but I always get a little frustrated at the fact that we don't talk about something as glaringly obvious as the violence that is occurring in the city of Chicago. On a daily basis, there are mass shootings that occur, and these occur with pistols, like both of you guys have alluded to. But for some reason, that's never discussed. However, those numbers are incorporated into the federal database to show the number of mass shootings for our country. So if you look at it on the whole, and you look at the statistics on it, the majority of mass shootings occur in major metropolitan markets. Places like Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, extremely large cities where they have high levels of violence. When people start talking about, and Johnny, I really appreciate how you put assault weapons in quotations for me, because I would have been over here triggered if you hadn't. Assault weapon is a made-up term. You can't have an inanimate object that is assigned a verb. So you can't have an assault microphone. A microphone can't assault somebody. It's an inanimate object. However, if I pick up that microphone and strike someone with it, I've committed an assault through using the microphone. Same thing with any firearm. So when you're talking about AR-15s, is the big hot topic nowadays. They're called assault rifles. That's a local colloquialism to the
because
U.S.
it's funny. Everybody thinks AR stands for assault rifle.
Right.
That's the ignorant of,
Yep.
like, the outsider. The people that have so much to say about this topic, right? Like, take all their guns, the ones exclaiming it from their front patio,
Sure.
also the ones that think AR stands for assault rifle. So
Right.
that's how deep their knowledge is on this topic, their knowledge in gun safety. I mean, that's the thing, too, is I think people need to recognize that there are legitimate courses that you need to sit through with the state to be able to carry a gun. People think like just open carries, you just sign a paper, they do, an employment background check, and they're like, he's a good guy, give him a gun. No, like, you have to learn a lot, and it goes to show most of the people talking about this stuff are pretty ignorant on the topic, because they think that, like, it's just all surface, that everything that their knowledge in it is just so surface value, and it's very sad. But
well, and we just saw the reporter. This was a couple years ago. A reporter from I think New York Times. I might be wrong on that. I'm sorry if I am, but it was a reporter tried to do a story on purchasing a firearm. I believe it was in New York, and he got denied. And that story went viral. He thought it was that easy to go in and buy an assault rifle, so he attempted to do so. Well, he was under an active protection from abuse order. That was caught by the background check. He was flagged and denied the purchase of the firearm. So that was egg on his face. We've seen reporters go into gun shows and try to, utilize this gun show loophole that they say. First off, there is no such thing as a gun show loophole. What they're likely referring to is a private party transfer of firearms. So, for instance, the Commonwealth of Kentucky does not require any background checks on the private transfer of a firearm amongst citizens. The statute does enumerate the fact that if I have any inclination that the individual purchasing my weapon is a prohibited person, I legally cannot transfer the firearm, and if I do, I will be charged for the transfer of the firearm.
Now, just to piggyback off of that, it is funny. This has sat with me for years, resonated for years. I want to say this was like maybe my sophomore year of college, so it was like 6 years ago or so. Then I'm sitting there watching just some video. It was a Kentucky representative that was trying to become reelected, and he wanted to one of his platforms was gun control and everything. And just to prove a point, he set up a lemonade stand outside the Capitol in Kentucky.
Oh, this is Tennessee.
Was it Tennessee?
Yep, it was Tennessee, yep.
And he sold the AR right in front of the Capitol just to prove to everybody how easy it is between citizens. And so when you're from somewhere like Ohio where you can't do that,
right.
It's like it's a humble reminder of when the country is exclaiming, yeah, I understand that there is regulations in some places. We need to remind you that there's also a severe lack of regulation in many others.
Sure.
So I think maybe one of our, going back to our checklist of what we're trying to accomplish, I think one thing that might need to be addressed or conceded is, at the very least, we need a universal standard where if we're going to be a tribe of 350 million that we allow to be armed, then we all need to be on the same page, because we understand that somebody could just drive down to Kentucky and go to one of these gun shows, or Tennessee, and just buy it.
Sure.
So I think it would resonate with people better, and we would all be a little bit more comfortable, at least if we knew that there was a set standard across the board.
Right.
So maybe that is something that we need to...
And that's one of the things that's been talked about in the past with universal background checks. This is my personal view on it. I'm not opposed to an idea of universal background checks, but I do know a lot of people in the Second Amendment community who are. And a lot of that has to do with the ineffectiveness of our background check system at this point. We've had shootings in the past 5 years where multiple of those shooters should have been prohibited persons, and they weren't. There were failures in the reporting system, there was failures in the background check system itself to flag these individuals to keep them from possessing firearms. Now, you want to talk about fixing what we have, I'm all for that. But when you keep talking about passing more laws, so rifles, assault rifles, as you guys like to call them, the AR-style rifles are used in less than one half of 1% of all shootings in the country yearly.
Right.
But they are used commonly by mass shooters. One of the big things that's never talked about is mental health. And every single one of these mass shooters has diagnosed mental health deficiencies. Back in the 90s, the government, to help cut costs, did away with the funding for mental health institutes across the board in every state. That led to an insane influx of mentally ill individuals who are not getting the proper treatment and housing, and they are now put out on the streets. I remember when it occurred in Augusta, Maine, our Augusta Mental Health Institute in Augusta, Maine, when they shuttered the doors, there was no warning, there was no plan. They just showed up and grabbed all the patients, ushered them out the front door, handed them their belongings, and locked the doors behind them. What then occurred was an influx of call volume for law enforcement officers to be the first line of defense and contact with these people. So you're taking men and women who have, let's be fair, almost no training at all in mental health, and they are now the first people who are making contact with these individuals on a regular basis. So you've led yourself to a perfect storm where we're assigning blame. And we as a country, I'm behind this, we as a country have a terrible, terrible history of taking accountability for our actions across the board.
Yay!
Whether it be when we had issues with the civil rights movement, when we had issues with feminism and with women's rights, nowadays with when we have kids who are shooting up schools, we have mental health issues. When it comes to people being able to sue McDonald's because of the supersize menu. All these things are indicative of a lack of accountability on a singular level. And that's what I'm really about is we need to work on what we have now. We need to so you want solutions? Well, I think the easiest solutions is to review and work on our mental health system, review and work on our background check system, and make sure there is accurate reporting from the mental health institutes to the background check systems. But, there's an interesting case that just came out here in Pennsylvania, and I don't know if you'll see it, but a big tip of the cap to Mr. Joshua Prince, who is a Widener Law Commonwealth alum. He is a phenomenal Second Amendment attorney. He just had a huge victory handed down on behalf of the Commonwealth that basically the court held that a singular 302, which is a mental health hold, a singular 302 situation in the history of an individual is not preclusive permanently on the ownership of firearms.
That's huge.
We deal with this on a regular basis in the first responder community. I'm a firefighter. I'm an EMT. Mental health is a big taboo subject, and I think all of us can agree on that. Even in law school, we're told about lawyers helping lawyers, but we all notice at different times when our classmates are struggling. And I think a lot of us do a good job of reaching out to those people and making sure they understand that they are supported and that they have a support network. But when it comes down to it, our country tends to stigmatize different facets of our subsets.
Right.
So when it comes to mental health, we stigmatize those individuals. And so you have individuals who may recognize that they need a little bit of mental health care. However, now with the new red flag laws, why is anyone going to go get mental health care? Because if you have that on your history and someone calls and just says, hey, Wayne Bridgham is a threat and he owns firearms, well, my guns get confiscated, and now I've got to go to court and I've got to appeal to a judge to give me back my firearms.
Right.
And the prosecution can easily get a copy of my mental health care records and say, well, no, he was seen by this institution or by this physician on a regular basis for bipolar or for anxiety or for post-traumatic stress disorder. They can point at any one of the things that are in my record and say he has an ongoing history of mental health. Your Honor, I submit that he's a high risk to the Commonwealth, and the judge, not wanting to be wrong, a lot of the same reason that judges tend to issue protection from abuse orders anytime they're really asked for, as long as there's a rational basis for why they're being asked for. No judge wants to be wrong, and especially on something like this. Nobody wants to be the one who's put in charge of it and said, you need to make the decision on whether or not this person potentially survives and lives, and then they die and you're wrong.
Right.
It's a bad day all around.
So one thing that piggybacking off of that, I'm trying to find this article. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
But one of the things I want to piggyback off of that is recently in Pennsylvania, they made it illegal now, or at least there's some legislation trying to do so, that if you have a medical marijuana license, you cannot own a firearm or possess one. That's
actually something that Joshua Prince, so if you're interested in Second Amendment law or if you need some help or assistance with that, please reach out to the Prince Law Firm. They are phenomenal at this stuff. But it's an issue that he's actually taken on several times, and he's gotten the court to side with him. It's an issue that we're running across nationwide because federally, marijuana is still a Schedule I narcotic.
Right.
It's still illegal. So therefore, if you're utilizing it by a federal standpoint, people who were filling out the federal background check forms for firearms were saying, oh, I use marijuana, let me check yes on that. As soon as you check that yes box, you're precluded from owning and purchasing firearms. It also led to the rescission of license to carry firearms here in PA, because people have gone in to buy a gun, checked yes. That got flagged to the state police. The state police pulled them and saw that they had a license to carry firearms, and it was rescinded. Rightfully so. You check yes on that box, you're saying you're an illegal user of the substance. There you go. I mean, there's nothing we can do to help you out on that one. But it is an interesting issue that is coming up across the board all over the U.S., and it's really got to be something that's going to have to be led by the federal government, because they're the ones at this point who have it still listed as illegal under their schedule of narcotics and controlled substances. So until they alleviate that issue, even though states may go through in Colorado, California, even Pennsylvania, who has medicinal marijuana, the efforts they make to legalize it to an extent are only good within the confines of that state. And I'll submit to you that even though they've legalized it statewide and statutorily in that commonwealth, you're still federally illegal, which means you can be arrested by federal agents for the possession of those substances because you're violating federal law.
Yes, however, it's just very interesting that there's no box to be checked on that list for, I don't know, are you on Xanax or, like antidepressants? You on it? Like, it's not like, but I guess the weed industry just doesn't have a big enough lobbying industry in our government, right?
Not yet. But they're getting there. And I mean, even my wife is a physician. She's had an opportunity to review some of the initial studies that are coming out, and she's finding it kind of interesting to watch where it's going. I always urge people to exercise caution and cautious optimism when these things come out, because vaping is a great example. When vaping came out, everyone jumped right on the bandwagon and thought, this is it. This is how we get rid of the smoking and tobacco epidemic. However, now we're seeing massive studies over the damage that is being done to people's lungs, and the damage that's being done, and people being put in medically induced comas.
But, however, we only because we had the same conversation on Wednesday. The only problem with the e-cigarette ban is 6 people have died using black market e-cigs. 8 million people die a year of cigarette use.
Sure.
So it's just like, who was losing to the e-cigarette industry besides the tobacco industry? Who's the biggest conglomerate in our government? The tobacco industry. And it just seems way too... grab our pitchforks, we're compelled. 6 people have died across 350 million. But man, 8 million a year, we could pallet that because at least it's paying our checks. It's just like... The government works in weird ways.
Yeah,
but I think you made some really great points. I'm really glad you brought up... What was the family's name again on the farm so people can look it up?
The Bundys. Yep.
So you have the Bundys. I think that was a great example. To make it a little bit more real, though, today is supposed to be the day that everybody's supposed to go storm Area 51, right? And why did that become a joke? Like, why do we cackle at how hilarious that is? Because there's no realm where you even have a chance against our government. So at the point at which you want to make yourself nerfed and soft even more, I mean, at the end of the day, we're not beating our government. But you gave us a very legitimate example where the government tried to push their hand on someone. The person pushed back and was successful. So this is a modern day reality. But in addition to that, if we can laugh at the fact that we can't compete, then maybe we need to accept the fact that, wow, we are helpless. And the same people that are liberal to take everybody's guns are the same people who trust the government the least. And so you want to have a logical conversation with these guys of okay, if you're just as afraid of the government as me, right? They have all the power, we can't stop them, and not saying that they are a danger yet, but they could. And that's the whole philosophy of this. Yes, the whole fun concept of you should be able to make my day law, blow someone's head off if they're trying to break into your house.
Sure.
Cool, I'm all for it. But also, let's acknowledge why I'm putting my foot down, why I'm standing for this. Because the people who really have a dog in the race of taking your gun is not the kid shooting up the school. it's Hillary Clinton,
Sure.
right? Like, so that kid that shot up the school, he's not even engaged in the gun policy conversation. He doesn't care because he's still blowing up your 13-year-old in 5th grade.
Right.
Like, he doesn't care about this discussion. The people who care about the discussion are the ones that don't want you to have your gun. And that should be enough right there for you to sit back and go, why don't we want this? Okay.
One more thing I want to touch on, at least with Johnny's statement here.
Yeah.
So the size and shape of the projectiles are capable of firing loud for greater propensity to kill. That's actually a good point, but it's actually kind of the counterpoint. The original idea, so back in World War II, 30 caliber rounds were the gold standard. All the firearms that were used in World War II operated on a 30 caliber or above projectile. Nowadays, we're at a 5.56, which is the NATO version of the 223. It's about a 55 grain round that travels at over 3,500 feet per second. The idea with the 5.56 is, number one, it can travel through most body armors unless you have actual plates, armored plates, which our military and law enforcement do tend to carry in their tactical vests. The idea is that the round is so powerful and so fast, it doesn't necessarily give you a guaranteed kill, but what it does do is it brings one person down. Now, that individual who's down has to have 1, 2, 3 people who come render aid to them. So instead of instantly killing one person, you're instead taking 3 to 4 individuals out of a fight because they have to render aid to the one person who's been injured. An interesting fact is the Geneva Convention outlaws the use of hollow point rounds in conventional warfare. So hollow point rounds are rounds that have a opening on the front of the round. When the bullet makes contact with a hard substance such as a human body, the round actually blossoms open and it increases the surface area as it travels into this object that it struck. It dispenses the energy quicker and it allows for less likelihood of over-penetration. But it does do significantly more damage because the hydraulic damage to the human body, the wound cavity that's opened is significantly larger. So that was why the Geneva Convention, I believe, shifted away from hollow point rounds, was because the size of the wound cavities that were being created, as preposterous as it is, they wanted people to, I guess, be able to survive when they get shot in war. It's kind of strange because you're in war. Your survivability isn't necessarily something that's guaranteed as it is. So, but U.S., we play by the rules. So our soldiers are issued full metal jacket and ballistic ammo, which is not hollow point. There are states, New Jersey's one, that has outlawed the use of hollow points across the board. I know law enforcement officers from different areas of the U.S. who have to travel through New Jersey or regularly go into New Jersey for their job as a police officer. They have to stop prior to the border, unload their weapon, and swap magazines so they're only carrying ballistic ammo or FMJ, and that's what they have while they're in the state because that's the requirement the state put in. As a firearms,
now, do you support that kind of?
I do not because so the big problem, like I told you just about with the 5.56, ballistic ammo does not tend to deform easily. What that means is when that round makes contact with something like, say, human body, when you get struck by a ballistic round, that round maintains its shape, so it continues on through and it doesn't lose energy as quickly as a hollow point will. So you have the risk of over-penetration and possibly striking second and third subjects behind the individual you're shooting at because of the penetration of the round through your initial target.
Okay, so you have, it's obviously a clear increase of more casualty. However, when the shrapnel breaks inside you in a hollow point, I mean, that's isn't that as damaging to your internal organs as it gets?
Well, it depends. So they do have ammunition that's called frangible ammunition. That's designed that when it impacts a solid target, it actually breaks apart into smaller pieces. It creates massive issues for trauma surgeons on trying to save someone's life. But when it comes down to it, if I'm deploying a weapon platform against you, I'm not your friend. I'm not trying to be your friend, and to be honest with you, I'm not looking to the future to decide whether you live or die. I'm protecting myself or my family at that point. So I'd prefer myself to use hollow points, mainly because of the idea that it won't penetrate overly far. There still is penetration through a human body. It occurs. However, the amount of energy that's expended getting through the initial target is significantly more than with ballistic ammo, so you have less likelihood of accidentally injuring unintended parties. And also, it takes less rounds to be able to put someone down. When you're putting larger wound cavities into a human body, it takes less rounds for you to subdue a threat. So instead of having to fire 10 or 15 rounds, you may only have to fire 4 or 5 rounds to be able to put the same kind of threat down. So there's laws all over this country that don't jive. And unfortunately, the conversations that we want to have about what can we do and what should we do to make a positive impact here, it's not the buzzword. It's not sexy. People don't get behind, well, let's work on our background check system and let's make sure that what we have in place is designed to work. Every time someone tells me, well, we need more laws, I can't help it. And yes, it's tongue-in-cheek. Yes, it's facetious, but it makes my point quickly and easily. If laws work so well, let's outlaw drugs. Let's outlaw murder. Let's make these things illegal.
Oh, shucks.
And people still do it? That's kind of the point here. Chicago and state of Illinois have some of the strictest gun control laws in the nation. It was only probably 6-7 years ago, I'm ballparking, that Illinois lost the case to the Supreme Court of the U.S., where the Supreme Court told them you have to issue some form of concealed carry licenses. It's just a requirement. The fact that they were told they had to do it, not much you can do about it from there. But that's how far behind they are, and they have massive issues in the city of Chicago with gun crime. For some reason, we don't want to have these conversations. And I don't know if it's because everyone's afraid of bringing race into it, if everyone's afraid of being called a racist. I don't know what drives that. But if you want to have a legitimate discussion about how do we curb gun death, Johnny brings up the point of, you have assault weapons and you have, different size stocks that make firearms more accurate. It's true to an extent, but it's really not. The firearm itself, the general rule when you're shooting is the smaller the gun, the more difficult it is to shoot accurately at any kind of range. That's just across the board. So if you hand me a hunting rifle and ask me to shoot a target 100 yards, I can do that. You hand me my concealed carry pistol and ask me to shoot the same target at 100 yards, I doubt I'm going to get there.
Right.
It's not designed for that kind of application. These things that we're assigning these characteristics to are very strange. The pistol grip, the bayonet lug on the front of the gun. I'll be honest with you. All these things, yes, they came from the base model. So while we're talking about it, AR-15 is Armalite Rifle 15. You can feel free to look this up. So when the AR-15, when the government back in, I believe it was the 60s, asked the industry for a new weapon platform for their troops, Armalite Rifle was the manufacturer, came out with the Type 14 first, then they made a different variation, the Type 15 that you know now. They did not have the capacity to manufacture it on the level necessary to hold the contract for the U.S. government, so they sold the patent and the copyright to Colt. Colt then took it and created their mass production and put it in place, and that's where you saw the military versions coming out. The civilian versions are very different from the military versions, namely in the fact that ours are strictly semi-automatic. And if you want to talk about the level of training, I couldn't help but kind of giggle internally when I saw that from Andre, only because, Andre, no offense, only because 2 days ago I was talking to a buddy of mine who's in the Air Guard down in Kentucky, and he brought up the fact that he just spent 2 days over the weekend at his guard rotation on the range doing qualifications. And part of that was you had all these airmen and Air Force people who were sitting in a room with a TV kind of like it's in front of us, and they played a 30-minute video on how to disassemble the rifle. When they got done, they were given a rifle and said, "Do it, please." Nobody could get it right. These are military people, military men and women, who just watched a video, a step-by-step how-to, and still screwed it up repetitively. So when it comes to the training aspect, to each their own. I train a lot with my firearms. I take as many classes as I can that were centered around firearms. Number one, because I'm interested in the subject.
But see, hold on. To your point, you just said to each their own. Well, maybe in this type of discussion, it shouldn't be to each their own. Maybe you need to get to the Wayne caliber of understanding and standard to be able to handle one of these weapons, right? Like, I think that may have been more to what, like, Andre's leaning at of, like, you know what? Maybe you're right, but everybody should have to achieve that. Because I'm sorry, I grew up the same way. Nobody in my family hunted nobody in my family shot guns. I had my grandfather's World War II guns that were so but my dad never went to shoot them, so I never had that opportunity. I meet a friend in rec baseball. He becomes one of my best friends. His dad's a hunter. He takes me under his wing, and that becomes my hunting family. Well, I can't stress enough what this man did to really just ingrain gun safety into my life. Now, I had a friend parallel to me who, same style, he was kind of the one that turned me onto it. His father was a firefighter, and they were huge hunters, and he went to all those classes. Now, I don't think I'm the best example, being critical of myself, right? Like, I had somebody who was their own teacher, who was not standardized by the state, but took it so serious and was so knowledgeable that he had us reading, and he had us, like, it was, I can't stress, we would spend days just, this is what we're doing. We're going to shoot on the farm, but it's all going to be centered around gun safety, just to teach us. And so I got to see another kid next to me, one of my good friends, who went through all of these classes and everything, and we came out the same on the end. So, yeah, did I kind of cheat the system? Maybe I got lucky, but at the same time, I'll be the first to say maybe I should have been forced to do the same thing he did. I was just lazy and didn't have to.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I say all of this strictly because there is so much to learn, and there's so much training that goes into this, and I think that's kind of Andre's point, and Johnny's point as well is, well, do we need to fight for the right for the person who doesn't go through that training to own the gun? Because that's kind of where we're at, is when we are fighting for the right to guns, we have some people who go through all of this, and you should never have the right to take it from them. But then there's other people who, listen, Walmart, I think, just stopped selling guns, or they're still selling. They still sell ammo.
Ammunition. They just stopped selling ammunition.
You know what's funny is I bought my .22 ammo this summer, and that must be the end of it, because, wow. And that was inevitable. But at the same time, you're like, should any Joe Schmo be? I mean, I was kind of in awe that I was buying .22 ammo at Walmart, you know? Like, I used to have to go to the gun and tackle shop in the center of town, and their hours were quirky because they were the only place, and you had to make it work. Well, now it's like, should we be able to just go to Walmart or Dick's? It was like, good, Dick's, maybe you should take the child-size 45 shotguns off the wall.
Right.
You know, like, again, I was that kid with the small-size kid gun having fun, but at the same time, does it need to be at Dick's? Does it, like... So, I agree with you, but I just feel like it shouldn't be to each his own.
Right.
Again, I'm not a big government person, I'm a libertarian, but where we have government, this is it. Like, set the standard for everybody so we're all happy. The person complaining shuts up, the person that wants to keep their guns gets to be comfortable.
And the only trouble you run into there is how do you quantify that and how do you enforce it from that point forward. So I've spent hundreds of hours training with firearms over just a couple of years, really. I don't even want to guess how much time I've spent training with my firearms, taking classes on them. I'm a certified instructor for the Department of Criminal Justice Training in the Commonwealth of Kentucky for concealed deadly weapons courses. I used to teach advanced concealed carry, practical carry, home defense 1, advanced home defense. I taught all these classes to people and individuals who had a thirst for the knowledge. But how do you quantify that? How do you force someone to take those classes? Not only that, but something we had touched on prior to this, and that I want to bring up. How do you enforce that for the indigent population?
Right.
Now, there's a cost associated with all these classes. I didn't just give away my classes. I charged a fee for people to attend these classes and to give them some of my knowledge. How do you force that on people who maybe can't afford it? Maybe someone who purchases a firearm for a couple $100 legally, but they don't have the expendable income to be able to attend my class and to spend those hours training.
Well,
how do you force them?
How does this person get their mail, right? The government set up a postal system. So maybe if this is something that we all want/need, just like education, publicly for academics learning mathematics and history, maybe the government needs to supply gun safety education.
The only thing I'd caution on that is, back, 2 years ago when we started in law school, how many people told us the government's not coming for our guns? Nobody wants to take your guns.
Yeah.
What did Beto
And that became
just
a mockery, right?
Yeah, what did Beto just say openly?
What's that?
Hell yes, I'm coming to get your AR-15s. It's all over the news. And my point at that time was, I don't care what they tell me. The only reason to create a national gun registry is so that you have a track of who owns what firearms and where they are at all times. Now, in a perfect world, I don't have a problem with that. I have no reason to hide what guns I own. However, when the day comes that they decide that now is the time for confiscation, now they have an entire database of who owns what guns and what houses to go search. That's my problem. And 2 years ago, people were looking at me and other gun owners like, okay, take off your tinfoil hat.
Right.
Come down from the roof. Nobody is coming to take your guns. 24 short months later, we have Democratic candidates for presidency who are openly saying, hell yes, I'm coming to get your guns.
That's insanity.
It bothers me on a very deep level that this is the point we're getting to. And unfortunately, it's taking a lot of us in the gun community who are open to having these discussions, and you're closing a lot of doors because we don't want to have discussions with people when we know 2 years later that we're being told we're coming for your guns. All right, I'm your Huckleberry.
All right. I have a lot of things that I also want to address, but I think the perfect transition right now would be to talk about my buddy Trey's response. So a response set in by my buddy Trey. It's funny, he grew up in Maryland, then moved to Cleveland, and he was the Ravens kid that we all grew up with, and he was the only kid on our football team rooting for the Ravens. We couldn't stand it. And then he takes a trip to China once in high school and then becomes a Chinaman. Never comes back. He's literally Chinese now.
Hey, good for him.
Hey, I love him. Trey's the best. But in light of that, Trey's been living a lot in China, and Trey gave us a great question or response to ponder, and I'd love to address it. So, Trey says, so as you know, I live and work in China, where fun ownership is not only illegal, it is completely unfathomable. Due to us having guns, many Chinese people are absolutely afraid of going to America because, as they say, everyone owns a gun, and I will be shot. The other night, I was talking with a few of my foreign friends and was explaining how Ohio is an open carry state, and they laughed at how ridiculous that is. One person commented that they could never imagine feeling so unsafe that they would actually want a gun. In America, the right to own a gun is a given, but to many outside our system, it seems absolutely crazy. So my question for your show is, do you think this is due to outsiders not understanding the situation, Americans not being in touch with modern values, some combination of the two, or for any other reason? What do you think, Wayne?
Well, I think it's a great question.
It's a great question.
It's a great set of talking points to go over. So, Trey, thank you for the question. So, first I want to touch on the issue of modern values. What bothers me there is if you want to subjugate the entire conversation, we can do that by saying Americans don't value life, and the modern world, you don't need a gun. You know, you don't need one in Iraq, Afghanistan. You don't need one in England. You don't need one in Germany. All these places where you think that these people say, well, you don't need a gun. However, your values are not my values. His values are not my values. My values are not his values. Everyone is different, and that is the one thing about the United States of America that I really take pride in living here, is that we do allow different people to live their lives differently as long as they don't abridge the civil liberties of another human being. So my beliefs of firearm ownership are core to me. But you know what? Even my wife, who grew up in a hunting family, they're not that important to her. If my guns went away tomorrow, she wouldn't lose a wink of sleep. To her, it's not a huge deal. To me, it is a big deal because I really enjoy firearms, and I really enjoy being able to protect myself and my family and know that I'm not one of the individuals that when the 2 o'clock in the morning thud at the door occurs, that I have to hide in a corner of the bedroom holding my wife and a phone, praying to God that someone with a gun gets there in time to save my wife. Me personally, all right, if it's my time, punch my ticket, let's go.
Right.
But would I want to sit there and watch my wife be brutalized because I didn't own a firearm? No. Now, with that being said, is it likely to occur? Absolutely not. The odds of it occurring are very, very slim and marginal at best. But the chance does exist that could hurt. So
it's also very interesting that this comes from a perspective from China, right? Because when we consider China, I mean, I've wrestled with this, especially after having some great conversations with Trey. It's something that you really have a hard time, digesting, but maybe there's some very legitimacy, or there is a lot of legitimacy behind a system that really limits your ability to be an individual. It's terrifying to imagine a country that has assimilation camps that takes out of country, non-nationalistic citizens and puts them in a camp somewhere to make them assimilate to your ways. It's pretty terrifying that that's just an average way of life in China.
Sure.
But aside from that, there's a lot of, like, when you look at these types of societies, strict worker ants, right? We don't have time for you to sit there and, like Socrates, ponder why the sun comes up. You're going to sit down, you're going to do your work, keep your tunnel vision, do your job, keep your nose out of everybody else's business, and we'll grow as a group. Your dedication and life and value will be to being a part of the tribe versus being the individual and trying to be this. And if there's one thing to be said about the American way, is it does kind of breed a selfless or selfish, I don't know, characteristic in each person of like, yes, we lose sight of we're a team because it's all a game of making our own success. So I've always wrestled with this concept of maybe it would be in the long run safer, easier, and for I'm a utilitarian. I'm hoping for a one world government one day where we're all on the same team. It's going to take aliens. Aliens are going to come down. We're all going to go, okay, we're done. Like, I'm done worried about going to the bank today. We need to figure out what's going on with these guys. We'll all become one planet, hopefully. And at that point, we need to consider, how do we want to run these people? Do we want everybody to have a voice? Because right now we're realizing with the internet, now everybody's got a voice. We're like, whoa, it's like an echo chamber. We're hearing everybody. Do we really want to hear everybody? There's people who are so dumb and ignorant, and they've got a louder voice than some of the most, intellectual people in our society.
Sure.
So, when I push back against what I value and my perspective, I really start to wonder, I want to be an individual, but is that really the best for this utilitarian world? Like, should that be our goal? Or should our goal be a worker ant, where we've got our head, we've got our queen, but at the end of the day, we're all equals. We are all just trying to make the gears turn and the clock tick.
Right.
So, again, China petrifies me even more. I'd rather be worried about Bill shooting me at school than be worried about the state taking me to an assimilation camp.
Right.
So, that petrifies me more, but is that because, again, like Trey's saying, I have the American perspective.
Right.
The Chinese perspective is I'm afraid of people being allowed to think individually and be their own people. Why are they not, in the tribe mentality? So it's more of a social conflict of how do we address that? And which is better? Can we figure is that possible?
Well, I think what's better is too subjective for us to make a decision because
Nailed it.
The Chinese people who reside in China, they're happy with their way of life. Like Trey says, they can't fathom walking down the street and seeing someone open carrying a firearm. That's perfectly fine. If they're comfortable in that median, they need to stay in that median. However, me in this country, I believe in the freedoms that we have across the board. I believe in everyone's right to walk up to me when they know I'm a gun owner and say, I don't think guns are safe and I think they should be outlawed. Okay, why? Let's have that discussion. At the end of the day, we're not going to change each other's minds. Let's be clear on that. There's one thing I've learned through 35 years. We will never have a discussion where I can actually change someone's mind. However, what we can do is gain an understanding of perspective. And if you can do, I love how Alexander mentioned it, if you can step back and you can think analytically about what the person is telling you, and if nothing else, try to gain an understanding of why do they believe what they believe. You gain a better understanding of the entire dilemma that we're faced with.
So, hold on. Just following, I want to play that thought, hypothesis out. When we have what you said was, if these people feel comfortable with this way of life, then that's what they need. Okay, well let's play out your kind of thought game. Why do they feel comfortable without having it, and we feel uncomfortable not having it? Right? I think, again, I'm petrified of big dogs. As I've gotten older, I've gotten more comfortable with it, but it 100% roots to, I had a 4-pound dog growing up, but it also roots to when I was in kindergarten being attacked by a dog on the way to the bus stop. So nature versus nurture, what makes you who you are? I've seen so much of your character and who you are is by outside effects, your parents, all these other things. But then in addition to that, it is part of it's your DNA. That's why we have this dichotomy. But again, I'm petrified of dogs. I blame one incident in my life. So a lot of these things are socialized. So when you ask, why are these people comfortable without the guns? Why are we uncomfortable, when we don't have them? It's kind of like, I want to push back or put it all on, I think it's just socialized, right? You have a state telling you, guns are bad, be afraid of guns. If you see somebody around you with your guns, be terrified, or we're taking you to the assimilation camp. Well, you're going to teach your kids to be comfortable not around, not having guns and everything, and that becomes a way of life. And then when you have people like, hey, did you hear the Bundys had to fight off the state and the state killed their cows? Yeah, then I want my guns, right? Or your dad's like, hey, this is your grandfather's gun from World War II. And you're like, wow. And, you go to a shooting range. Then it becomes a part of your way of life. And in both realms, you have people living this totally opposite existence, equally nonviolent. So, is it the guns, right? We keep coming back to, is it the guns? It's seemingly not the point. Let's read your shirt. What does your shirt say?
No, it says guns don't kill people. Proper trigger control, sight alignment, and
trigger control does,
and grip does. So,
yeah.
The reason I got this shirt, I've had this shirt for 5 or 6 years, but 115% correct. My firearms are inanimate, inert objects. They don't move. If you can show me a gun that comes off the production line and kills people without ever being touched by a human being and without any kind of external stimulus, that's a gun I agree we need to outlaw. That's dangerous. When you have something that can kill without being bothered, now we've got an issue.
Right.
Guns don't kill people. People kill people. It goes all the way back to the days of the Bible when Cain killed Abel with a rock. One of the things I made a note of, and it's funny we bring it to this point, the terrorism that has occurred over in England. So my wife and I took a trip last year over to England. It was an awesome experience. I was born in England, so getting to go back and see my cousins and see that country, what a great experience. But we're driving from the rental car facility to our first place we're staying, and we're trying to find something on the radio as I'm driving along the M and along the Metro, and we come across a talk radio show. Lo and behold, what subject are they talking about?
Guns.
I looked at my wife, she looked at me, and we laughed. What are the odds? I'm in a country that has essentially, for all intents and purposes, except for very limited hunting applications, has outlawed firearms. And within 15 minutes of being in the vehicle, I find a talk show that's hosting the discussion. What do we do about firearms? How do you feel? So one of the big things that has shifted over in that country due to the terrorist attacks is in the city of London, they call them the Met, the Metropolitan Police Department for London. They all carry sidearms now. Every single officer carries a sidearm with them. They've also gone further at this point to assign what they call firearms unit officers, who essentially would be like a tactical squad for the U.S. These are men and women who carry either rifles or carbine platforms, and they are assigned to high-risk areas. So we were at British Parliament, walking around the building, taking in the sights right there by Big Ben and by the London Bridge. And I kind of got into a little bit of an awkward moment because I'm staring at two of the firearms police officers, and I'm checking out their kits. I'm noting that one has an M4 variant, which looks like select fire short barrel rifle. He's got a 30-round magazine plus a 30-round magazine on his hip. He's carrying what appears to be a Sig Sauer sidearm. And so I'm just going through watching, looking at both of them to see what they're carrying and kind of taking it in. And as I get to the second one, I look at his MP5 that he's got and the extra magazines, and my eyes drift up to his face, and he's cold staring right at me. And I mean, you can see how uncomfortable he is that someone is reading him hard. So he slides over in my direction gently, and he asks, you all right? And of course, I kind of chuckle. I'm like, this poor guy thinks I'm sizing him up, thinks I may be, in there casing him. And so I explained to him real quick. I said, hey, I'm real sorry. I said, I'm from the U.S. I said, I'm a huge gun aficionado. And I said, I just found it interesting that you're carrying open firearms like that. And you can visibly see oh, thank God. For him, he realized at that moment, this is an American, someone who loves firearms. This is not a terrorist threat. But his thinking with me staring at him that hard was, am I sizing him up? Am I a threat? Am I a terrorist? This is what London and this is what England is going through currently because of not having guns. And listening to the citizens on the talk show, I thought I would hear a ton of people saying absolutely no firearms, and I would hear a couple jump in that would say we need guns. Every single person that called resoundingly said, we need guns. Now, to be fair, a lot of them said we need guns in law enforcement officers' hands because they are the first responders. However, they were adamant that firearms need to come back into their society and need to become a mainstay. There were quite a few callers who went further and said, I want a right to protect myself. You know, I couldn't imagine being in that role where you're out with your family, you're in London, you're taking in the beautiful sights, and you hear screams. You hear terrified screams, you see people running. You step forward and look, and here comes a madman wielding a machete. And he's hacking people as he's running. Anyone who falls is his new target, and they're moving towards you. You're with your family. What do you do? What can you do?
Literally, my next story was going to be when London passed the law that you cannot have a gun in London. A guy, mainly on the principle of don't take my guns, went on a stabbing spree and was able to stab 18 people in a half hour before anybody was even able to stop him. Yeah. So, here's a crazy person to prove a point that he could just do it, it's not the gun.
Right.
Like, okay, that should be enough. But here on BBC, just to kind of, emphasize it even more, gun crime offenses in London have surged by 42% in just the last year, and knife crime has increased by 24% as well. So it's like, here's London with an increased crime. Now, I think this is a perfect place to transition. Alright guys, sorry about that. We ran into some technical difficulties. Like Wayne was saying, we were spitting so much fire, the camera got too hot. So
it happens.
It happens. But real quick, I want to address this article because a friend of mine, Danny, was kind of pushing back on me of like, it's no longer a trend. All these mass shooters, right? Like you said, this quacky term, but all these people tend to be white males. It's no longer a trend. It's becoming pretty real to the point where now we need to start thinking, why? What is causing this? What's going on? We're always looking at, it's toxic masculinity. It's just because he's got a hot dog between his legs. Maybe there's something more to this. So I listen to Joe Rogan a lot, and so I've kind of been of the camp that every school shooter has been on antidepressants. That's a rhetoric he pushes. That's a rhetoric I've heard a lot. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find that statistic to save my life. Right. Now, I've seen, obviously, it's the internet. I've found it. Mm-hmm. But I haven't found it from a resource that I would be able to say, this is legitimate fact. So as I did deeper digging, there's this guy named Perter Langman. He has a PhD from Clark University, and he's he's a professor at Clark University, his PhD in counseling psychology from Lehigh University. So, just kind of discussing what his article talks about, it's about psychiatric, I'm going to put the link in the bio so you can check it out as well, because it really pushes back on this concept of everybody that's been a school shooter has been on psychiatric drugs. It doesn't seem that is fact. He brings up very real, individual examples where that isn't the case, but in most of them, I will also push back on his point. He doesn't want to give much value to the fact that they had it before. They weren't on it during the shooting, but they had it at their most pivotal ages growing up. So maybe that shouldn't be discounted. Maybe that should be just as legitimate. I don't know. But some of the words that I highlighted from what he talks about is how the problem with the argument of blaming medications for murder, however, is that though there has been a significant increase in the use of psychiatric medications, there has not been a corresponding increase in violence. In fact, there's been the exact opposite has occurred. The last time the crime rate for serious crime was this low, murder, rape, robbery, assault, that they fell to these levels were when gas cost 29 cents a gallon and the average income for an American worker was $5,807. This was 1963. So our crime rates are at an all-time low. My mom's a nurse, and so I've always watched her, she would talk about all these people that are medicated now and how quick parents are to throw their kid on a pill because he's being a kid with energy. I was attesting this issue to that more than I probably should have. Because when you break down some of these statistics, so I'm going to put up on the screen here, but Wayne, you could see on my laptop here. The first graph I'm pulling up here is how the violent crime rate in the United States per 100,000 inhabitants has gone down. Looking at 2010, now mind you, this we're looking at averages that go up to only 2010, and this really wasn't as big of an issue as it is today. So also taking into account this isn't really counting the last 9 years, which is huge. The last 9 years were the biggest.
Sure.
So got to take that with a grain of salt as well.
Absolutely.
But then also the next graph is also pretty cool or interesting of how just the murder rate in the United States per 1,000 inhabitants. Look at that. It's just the trend has gone down drastically. You could literally see these two graphs are parallel to each other in their own right. There seems to be something socially going on where we're able to curb violence. But here's the biggest graph. This one really kind of put the point that I was talking about in the forefront. Why are they all white guys? And we need to address that this is no longer a trend, it's becoming fact, and what's causing it, how do we address it? So this graph right here, the third graph, is how the homicide rates among persons ages 10 to 24 years of age by sex in the United States between 1991 and 2007. Again, this is used to show the trend is going down. Low-key, you're starting to see at 2010 it plateau a bit, but the trend is still going down. The big takeaway that blows my mind is look how drastically low that female line is.
Sure.
And we could probably acknowledge that most of those women that committed murder, because that's all it is 10 to 24 homicide rates, probably they were killing the man that was being aggressive to them, right?
Sure.
Like probably a wife beater or something. So in most of those cases, the women aren't even the aggressive one.
Well, I think it's interesting, real quick on a side note. Right there, what you just did is one of the problems in our justice system as a whole. You rationalize why a woman would kill, but you assume a man will kill for any other reason.
That's fair too.
I don't mean that as an attack on you.
No.
I wanted to point out that this tends to happen a lot, even in the justice system now with the prosecutors. When a woman comes forward and has committed some sort of violent offense, generally, immediately they start to rationalize are they a victim of abuse? Have they been abused? Were they being abused? We try to find a way to rationalize why a woman would commit a crime versus when a man commits a crime, we assume that it was for greed, jealousy, any of the other reasons that we'll attribute for the motive. And it's just an interesting paradigm. One thing I want to caution people on is with these graphs, I don't know, and I don't know if it says it in there, where did he get the data? Okay, so that was the next thing I was going to talk about is and again, this is why I'm putting it up here, because most of the research I was able to find paralleled this type of message of this is the most medicated the country has been, but also this is the lowest the crime rate has ever been. Sure.
So we need to look at these more as anomalies and less as dictators of a trend.
Sure.
But what was really interesting was almost all of their citations comes from a website, www.schoolshooters.info. And when you check out that website, this is the tough part, right? Fake news, false facts. I'm reading a lot of what this website cites, and there's some credible things in there, but there's also some what are you citing the Daily Mail for, right? So I don't know the credibility of this website. I mainly picked it because I really like the way this Peter Langman kind of just poses the concept for something for us to consider. Because honestly, so one of the things, you saw me earlier, I was going through my messages. I wanted to find, there's a podcast called Mike Boudet's Sword and Scale. Episode 61 is about this, it's about a child. Go check it out if you want to listen to the podcast. But it was brought to my attention what this podcast is about. It's about a 12-year-old who stabs a 9-year-old. The 12-year-old was severely abused by his mom and stepdad. Mom already had 2 kids taken away from her. It's just amazing in these types of situations. We had a kid when I was in high school shoot up Chardon school shootings. It was just maybe 40 minutes from our high school. So it was extremely impactful my senior year. It was a huge discussion again with the teachers, and this kid was a sicko. I'm sure you've seen, he made national news. He showed up to the trial with a shirt that said killer on it, and his last message to the parents, so guilty, do you have any last message, blah, blah, blah. And he stood up and he goes, I just want you all to remember that the same hand that took your kid's life will be masturbating to the thought of it every day. And you're just that's as unhinged as it gets, as disgusting as it gets. But we talked about how disgusting this kid was, right? This kid. Well, he's in his teens. He's a kid. Nobody, and it's amazing. You see the kid. He's a psychopath. He's got his shirt. The cameras are on him. That's all we see. Never once, when they do, they'll pan to the mom, and the mom's like, he was never like this. He's such a good kid. It's like, why do we never go, what are you? Like, what type of what did you do to make him this way? Now, again, nature versus nurture. Was this guy bit by the dog? Was he, his mom was abusive? Or was it was in his DNA? He's got, everything's not wired properly in his head. Well, this Peter Langman kind of pushes back on it. Our medication is rewiring people's head properly. It's doing what it's supposed to do. Right. And kind of knocking the medicine isn't doing it any justice. Right. But also, nobody else, you're less than 1% of our population, which means you're an anomaly, which means there's something going on here. Did you have parents that affected you different? When you've got a kid here that stabs a 9-year-old, but his mom's had 2 kids already taken away from her. She's got a history of being aggressive, abusive, and everything else. It's like, well, why aren't we going after her? We never talk about the parents, and in fact, the only conversation we have is that we want to arm the teachers, right? Like, we're so out on left field, not talking about what's really going on, that, I just threw a lot at you, Wayne, but I'd like to kind of hear what you think about the medication aspect of all of this, where antidepressants come in, and then also these trends. How do we affect them? What do we make of them? Because like you said, I just rationalize why a woman would be able to make these kind of acts, but I could never come up or fathom why a man would. So what do we do with that? How do we fix that?
And I don't know if there's any direct or easy answers to any of these questions. So the issue with medications, I'm someone who looks at things very analytically, and I don't want to necessarily know who's to blame. I want to understand the processes that led us to the point we're at. So my wife being a physician, I get a great inside look into the realm of medicine and how is it evolving. One of the things, and I've actually seen this with the education field as well. My mother is now director of special education for a school district up in Maine. The technology, knowledge, and open-mindedness of our professional basis, so attorneys, doctors, teachers, psychiatrists, has grown. Back in the 60s and 70s, you were told to man up, period. So if you came home from a conflict and you were crying at night and having nightmares, you hid that because you weren't a man. You needed to be a man. Nowadays, we understand there's post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's a very, very real, very, very, very difficult battle for a lot of our soldiers to fight when they come back stateside. We recognize that. We're diagnosing it more. We're prescribing medications more to help counteract the effects thereof. We're also working with people to receive proper counseling so they can learn to walk through those signs and symptoms and not be on medication the rest of their lives. So one of the big things I think we've seen is a societal shift and a paradigm shift of knowledge and the application thereof. So when you talk about students who are getting a pill thrown at them by teachers because they can't sit still, when I was growing up, that's what you were. You were just told to behave. And it was very rare to have students, even back when I was going through school, that were prescribed medication to deal with ADHD, or ADD, ADHD, things of that nature. Nowadays, the teachers and the psychiatrists have gotten a lot better at true diagnosis, as have physicians. So when they see these signs and symptoms, they don't throw medication at the kid right away. They try other things first. They try less invasive interventions to see if they can get it a point across and get the kid to get on board with what they need to do. Sometimes when you have these disorders, you can't control it. I have a good friend of mine from undergrad who has ADHD severely. He was a law enforcement officer. He readily acknowledges and embraces the fact that he needs to take his medication. Because when he's out on a call, he's wandering around. His mind is wandering. He's not paying attention to the suspect when his partner's talking to them. He's putting himself and other people in danger because he's not on his medication. So he got back on his medication because he recognized he needed it, and it was one of those things. So I think when we talk about why are we seeing these kind of shifts, we've gotten much more professional. The knowledge base is great. The empirical and science behind what we're doing has grown leaps and bounds, and we are seeing positive impacts. I agree with the article, and it kind of made my point from earlier that this is a mental health issue. We need to treat the root, not the symptom. So when we have someone who goes out and does a mass shooting, right now, I believe, and I'm spitballing, I think we've got 4 to 6 maybe mass shooters in custody that are in jail. The FBI, and I'm sure y'all watch Netflix, Mindhunters. The FBI has a behavioral analysis unit that specializes in the psychological aspects of killers. The entire Mindhunters series is based around the emergence of the behavioral analysis, and at that time the BSU, now it's BAU. But the series centers around the emergence of the behavioral sciences unit back in the 60s. And they started going and talking to serial killers using baseline interview forms to start noticing any of the things that were common between these killers. When they started finding commonalities, they started realizing that, okay, bedwetting past the normal age, fire starting, abuse of pets. All these things are precursors for psychosis or for serial killers. So now we know to watch for these things. And of course, not anyone alone. Please don't go home and tell your mom that your brother's a serial killer because he wet the bed till he was 11. That's not the case. Any one of these things alone does not constitute the fact that someone is a serial killer. However, when you start looking at the whole and start looking at all the signs and symptoms, abuse in the home, abuse of parents, lack of parents in the home, any of these things put together and you start seeing a lot of these signs and symptoms together are indicative of someone who has a propensity to kill on a mass scale. So my question, and I've been asking this since it's occurred, why aren't we drilling down and talking to these killers to find out, not the base level, like why did you kill? Yeah, come on. I don't care why they killed. I want to know the precursors that led to the potential of the mass shooting. Yeah, what's going on in your head? Right. And if we do that, we can then teach and train our schools, our administration, on red flags to watch for. Things they need to be aware of.
I'm glad you say that. The only point I was going to say was the silver lining to today's, mass shooting epidemic that's, we're having so many of them, is that we're doing a better job at keeping the killers alive. Mm-hmm. It used to be pray and spray and then a cop kills the kid for doing that. Now it's we need to apprehend this kid and bring him in. And we have more of these killers than if we just look at the past 10 years, the first 5 years, we were straight up killing these kids in cold blood. Yep. And we're having an increasing number of a collection of these people, which, like you said, I understand. I don't want these people to exist either. So having their existence at all is terrible. I agree. Mm-hmm. However, it is great that we have them because now we get to do those types of things. It is great hearing from you kind of the progression. We see it. We see it literally with graphs. This is what's going on. Right. What's great, though, is we get to see maybe because of this trend, maybe that is where we're headed. Mm-hmm. It's just we just got to let time do its thing. Absolutely. Let science do its thing. Let us learn because we're still in that learning process. Okay. I know we got to wrap things up.
You're good.
But if I
wanted to touch real quick on one thing. So when you're looking at statistics, one of the things that the gold standard in the U.S. right now for statistics and law enforcement is the UCR, the Uniform Crime Report. This is a report that is compiled yearly by the FBI. However, there are some downfalls. Now, they're not as big anymore, but they are still there. So the biggest downfall to the Uniform Crime Report that exists is that it is a crime can only be graded once in their statistical scale. So if you have someone who commits a rape, a murder, and an arson, only one of those gets recorded into the database. So they pick the worst of the three, whatever they subscribe is the worst. So for instance, rape is a very personal, very nasty thing. A lot of times rape will be the worst one. So they just mark down one in the column of rape. Those other two crimes are not captured. So for reporting purposes, you will see that even though it says our violent crime is at an all-time low, well, maybe that's because we're not capturing all the homicides accurately on the UCR because we're only recording it as an interpersonal crime like rape. The other drawback, and it's not as big anymore because almost every police department in the U.S. does this. However, if you look at the timeline of crime, you'll notice that there is a discernible shift down. The red flag there is that it's not a required reporting. This is voluntary reporting only from a police department to the FBI. So if the police department doesn't want to report their data, they don't have to. This was extremely common back in the 80s and 90s when everyone wanted to say our town is safe. even nowadays, when you have smaller towns that host large universities, they're hesitant to report a lot of the crimes that occur because they want to be able to tell incoming students, look how safe our campus is.
Right.
We haven't had a homicide in 12 years. Well, they have. They just haven't reported it to the FBI to be captured. So there are things that are occurring that are not being captured. Again, this is voluntary reporting. Nowadays, it's not as common because the group of law enforcement in the U.S. understand and embrace the necessity of reporting this information and the value of reporting the information so they have a good snapshot of the entire U.S. But there are downfalls within the reporting system. And even though the FBI runs this program, it's not perfect. So look at the statistics, review the statistics, but understand, like with any kind of statistical system where they're compiling data, there are anomalies that will not be captured, and it's not a perfect snapshot of what's going on in our country.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that in the slightest. If you don't mind, I think Chase was my favorite response. This was like the greatest thing ever, so I want to talk about it. But I do have two quick things to ponder to end with that I want to get your take on. So, okay, my buddy Chase, a.k.a. Flime, he threw this in on us, and I think this is a great way to kind of ponder the question and wrap up our answer. So, Chase, thank you very much. Is preventative measures against gun violence a privilege? I'd like to hear you ponder this question. Is preventative measures against gun violence a privilege? What I mean by this is the problem of gun violence due to our inability to provide help for those who need it the most? A lot of times, it seems those who commit these acts are those who have less resources available to them. Is that because they don't want mental help? Is offering help for individuals considered free health care, therefore some oppose? Why doesn't an employee get offered counseling when they are let go? Does a family not have the right amount of money or insurance to send their child to a professional? Are these who provide help at places of education not trained enough? Do those who recognize the signs of a person in distress not have the authority to act? Or is it too dangerous for their own welfare? I guess I'm really posing the question, have we failed to control guns, or have we failed to help our fellow person? Woof. Talk about a great way to end it.
Yeah, fabulous question, Jason. Very well posed. There's so much meat. We could probably spend an hour just
these
on
are
this
all
one
amazing
question.
questions.
Yeah, I mean, any one of the questions that have been submitted, we could spend probably an hour discussing at length about the different facets. So the first thing I want to look at is you ask, are preventive measures against gun violence a privilege? I think there's a lot of people out there who feel comfortable saying that there is definitive evidence that gun violence occurs in predominantly minority areas. So, like I've been mentioning, the inner city of Chicago, it's not the city of Chicago, it's the south side of Chicago, which is predominantly an African-American community. I think what we're failing to do is we're failing to have discussions about the humanity of it, like you said. We all too often get caught up in race, whether we're afraid, like I said, we're afraid to be labeled a racist, or we're afraid to have a discussion because it's going to center around race. I don't shy away from that one bit. I think we have a lot of problems in our country, and I think we have a lot of opportunities that we can provide to people. Mental health is a major, major aspect. I've talked about it twice. I'll talk about it a third time. I think you hit the nail on the head that, number one, there's a negative stigma in our society, and we are doing better. We are moving away from stigmatizing those who have mental health issues, and we're getting to a point where people are feeling more comfortable stepping forward. However, I really feel like the idea, the theory behind red flag gun laws, the theory is good, the practice is bad. You allow someone to have the unilateral power, so Alexander can pick up the phone and call Susquehanna Regional Police Department's down where I live and call them and say, hey, Wayne is a threat. He owns a lot of guns and, he just acts weird. Well, Susquehanna Regional, if they believe they have enough evidence, can just step in and come in and confiscate my weapons and list me as a red flag individual, and now I have to go through the court system to try to get my weapons back. The idea is good, but the practice is not what we need. Number one, you're putting men and women in law enforcement in a very precarious position because they are forced to step into a situation where they don't have all the details. For all they know, they are walking into my house, and my house could be booby-trapped. I could be nuttier than a squirrel turd in an almond factory. They don't know that. They're forced to jump in. They're forced to make a decision on the fly as to what's best. They don't have all the best training, but the training has gotten better. I don't agree with the red flag gun laws because, number one, I've spoken to countless members of our law enforcement community. You like that one, huh?
I'm sorry. I'm just trying to repeat it in my head so I can ingrain it for future use. Like, that is the greatest.
None other than a squirrel turned into an almond factory. It happens.
Sorry, please continue.
No, you're good.
I loved your point so much.
I've spoken with countless men and women in law enforcement from different jurisdictions, not just Pennsylvania, but from Kentucky, from Maine, California, from Florida, from Georgia, all these places that are starting to see these things surface. And resoundingly, they've all said they want nothing to do with this. Number one, it's a constitutional nightmare for them to jump into of conducting a search and a seizure when they have minimal evidence and removing someone's right to their Second Amendment. It's a nasty situation, and it doesn't effectively help the way that it's supposed to. We already have processes in place through the current protection from abuse orders that preclude individuals who are found guilty or who are found to be the subject of an active PFA. They cannot own and they cannot purchase firearms during the lifetime of that PFA. So that means they're not allowed to be in possession of, and if they're found in possession of, it's a violation of the PFA. They can be arrested for that. Once it's logged into the system, they're flagged in the database. No matter where they go to try to purchase a firearm, it'll flag as a preclusion, and they won't be able to purchase a firearm. I understand our need to want to help. You know, you talk about why doesn't an employee get offered counseling when they're let go? We are in a capitalist society, my friend. We have people talking all day about needing $15 minimum wage, a livable wage. It's commendable. I support the idea, the premise, but it won't work. And because we live in a capitalist society that it won't work. So
the big one is universal basic income. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Everybody gets $12,000, $1,000 a month. Right. Great, that's a great concept. But you also took $40,000 of my hard-earned cash. So when I get my paycheck, half of it's gone.
Sure.
Take that $12,000 and shove it. Mm-hmm. I'm paying into the system. My taxes are paying for you to build the biggest military in the world. Right. Give the kids their education. I am a functioning member of society. Mm-hmm. I am a hamster in the wheel keeping this thing moving.
Right.
I don't need you to give me $12,000. How about this? How about you take $12,000 less? If you think it'll help me be creative, it'll help me live all these things, then just take $12,000 less, because what really stinks of what's in that bill, the bill says those unwilling to work also get paid. I'm not with that. Again, you said it's a capitalistic society. Yes, I am somebody who's willing to work my ass off for you and my fellow man. I want you to do the same. Again, why I kind of think China may not be too far off with the worker ant thing, right? Like, I like being creative. I like to be able to express myself, but also remind yourself, back to reality, honey cakes, you are a part of this tribe. And so I'm totally cool. Everybody needs to be comfortable. I go to McDonald's enough to where I think we need to respect those people. Maybe, but also...
See, I'm the opposite.
Wait,
I'm the opposite because they don't do quality work.
That's what I was just about to say. Also, though, when our law school professor comes back and goes, yeah, but also those jobs weren't made. They're not supposed to be jobs for you to live on. They're supposed to be jobs for a 16-year-old trying to make a car payment so he could take his girlfriend out, in 10th grade. Like, that is what those jobs are for. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, then in that concept, I'm totally kosher. I'm with it. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is you have this kind of situation where it's like, you have people crying. That's going to be the biggest topic for our election coming in. And it's like, guys, let's look at what the words say. If the words unwilling to work don't make you want to grab a trash can and vomit, then we're not on the same page. We are talking apples to oranges.
Sure.
And so I'm 100% in agreement with you on that as well.
Yep. And I mean that's why it won't work. So I agree with you. There's some general rules in the world. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the general rule, the best practice is you never fire someone unless it's a Friday. Why? Well, if they're going to act crazy, they have a weekend to think about it. You have a weekend to get security in place. And most likely by the time Monday comes, they'll have calmed down. You also don't have them having the ability the next day to show up at the workplace and just create a negative work environment because they have a weekend to wrap their mind around it. There's things that go on that you don't realize that are out there, and I mean, as I've gotten older, I've learned a lot of these little loopholes that are there. I think what we need to do as a society is we need to stop trying to assign blame, and we need to start trying to understand what led to the situation. It may be an issue with home life where mom and dad caused the problem. It may be an issue where you just generally have a bad person. Those do exist. I mean, we've all met people throughout our life where we just don't like them. And sometimes you've met their parents and you actually like their parents. I've met people where I don't want to give them the time of day. But their parents, if they need something, they can call me and I'll help them out all day of the week. They're good people. Sometimes people just make terrible decisions in their life and they need to be held accountable for their decisions. But we need to stop trying to assign blame and start trying to understand what is the root of the issue. Guns are not the root of the issue. If you take away guns, Australia, England, China, look at all these places that have taken away guns, they still have interpersonal violence that occurs. If we're going to attribute it to something, we need to attribute it to a lack of mental health care and a lack of caring amongst, like Chase said, for our fellow human being. Right. We need to start caring for one another. We need to start being willing as a society, and that's one of the things that in my opinion, I believe that's led to the situation we're in now is back in the 60s, 50s, 40s, we were a community. It was a village raised the child. Nowadays, everyone is out for their own, and that's it. They don't care about anyone. They want to take care of their own, and that's it. Well, that's where the problem therein lies, is we used to have a very moral society. And I'm sure there's ladies out there who aren't going to appreciate this, but I'm using this as an example. In the 40s and 50s and 60s, you opened doors for women. You were polite to women. You didn't use coarse language or vulgar language in front of women. All these things that are known as chivalry has gone the way of the dinosaur and has begun to die off. Now, I'm all for equality amongst races and genders across the board, but just because I hold a door open for you isn't saying that you're not capable of doing it. It's because I'm a good person and I like to help anybody who needs the help when they need it. So I think we have a very huge divide in society with our moral fiber. I think the moral fabric of our society is torn, and I think it's only getting worse. I don't want to talk ill of politicians across the board, but I've seen over the last few years that we've become more and more and more divided at the rhetoric of politicians past and present. So for someone to blame the current sitting president, that's preposterous. There's been people before him that have done as much, if not worse, damage. We are becoming a society of individuals instead of looking at our commonalities.
Well, because we're losing nationalism, right? Like we are losing our patriotism.
9/11 just passed, and one of my favorite memes that I saw that I kept really hit me hard was I miss the America of 9/12, and I do. I miss what we were in those months thereafter. Seeing the men and women of New York and the first responders come together to create a massive search and rescue and recovery effort. Watching our country band together with our allies to take the fight to the people who did it to us. It was okay to be an American, and for that short period, race went out the window, gender went out the window, you were an American. And that's what I think we have the problem with nowadays, is we all want to draw the distinction of, well, when a black guy gets beaten up by the cops, that's the black guy's problem. No,
and it's a white cop, right? Like we that's just the title. Yep. Not to mention, there were probably out of a tribe of 350 million, at least 1,000 encounters similar to that happened that same exact day. But because this is the perfect story, black man, white cop. And why am I hearing about some guy in Toronto, Michigan, wherever? It's a weird world we live in. But, if we take what Wayne said as our mission statement, this is what we're trying to accomplish. We need to have more discussions about what's causing this problem and less conversation about who's to blame. Well, the sad part is, and I think the way to do that is, the first step is disarming our politics and stop allowing this to be a political weapon. Sure. School shooting happens or concert shooting happens, and literally the next day or the next hour, it's immediate. Democrats are trying to weaponize it for their campaign, and Republicans are trying to weaponize it for their campaign. So they're trying to find, oh, well, this is a white guy, screw Republicans. And then the Republicans come in and go, oh, this guy, remember we had
a registered Democrat.
There was the one in Walmart, right? There was that school shooting that happened I'm just talking very recently. There was one in like Texas, and there was one in Ohio or something, right? Yep. Or am I wrong?
It
was Dayton. It was Dayton and Texas.
Dayton, Ohio, yeah.
So one of them was a conservative, one of them was a liberal, and you had all the Republicans out here tweeting about the Democrat who shot everybody up. Look, see, Democrats do it too. And then you have the Republicans going, look it's the NRA. You know what sucks is we had this whole conversation, the NRA never came up, which is also a huge... You can never talk about enough. This conversation is so in-depth.
Oh, yeah.
But
I'd be happy to come back and talk more about it,
because
there's so many things we haven't got to touch on that are critical to this conversation. And I mean, if we got classmates who want to come and be part of a panel and have this discussion as a group, I'd love to have that, because the point to this, one of my biggest downfalls that I see in our society is we've lost the ability to have discourse with each other.
Yes.
Whether or not Alex and I agree, at the end of the day, when this is done recording, we're still friends. Anybody who submitted questions that doesn't agree with me, at the end of the day, I still consider you my friend. Just because we don't have the same moral view on a subject doesn't mean we can't get along. But the key part is to have those discussions so you understand where I'm coming from and I understand where you're coming from. Right. One thing that I do want to touch on, we had an issue at our law school with an individual who was removed from the school last year. And I don't want to get too much into the details of that, because that was a separate issue. But what was interesting to me was to see so many anti-Second Amendment classmates of mine who in the days and weeks thereafter came to me and said, Wayne, I'm glad you're here and I'm glad you've got my back. Couple things. Number one, I've never said I have anyone's back. I don't walk around telling people if something happens, I got you. At the end of the day, I absolutely will do my part to protect my classmates, my friends, my family. I'll protect anyone who needs protecting as best as I can. But it was preposterous to see people who were so adamant against the Second Amendment and wanting to take guns and wanting to put so many controls and restrictions in place. As soon as the threat hit home to them, suddenly they're pro-Second Amendment and wanting Wayne Bridgham to be allowed to carry a firearm on campus because they believe I'll protect them. Now, that being said, absolutely. I wouldn't look at you and lock you out of a room and be like, hi, bye, have fun, good luck. But at the same time, I'm not a trained law enforcement officer. Right. I'm not someone who's actively in service. I have knowledge and base, and I have a willingness to try to sacrifice myself. But you need to take yourself out and you need to think about these situations analytically of what if it is your school? What if it is your home? What if it is your family who's in that situation? You're going to be hoping there's someone like me who's willing to step in and do whatever they can to protect not just myself, but everyone in the immediate vicinity. And that's what people tend to forget. And we don't get a lot of public press when these things occur because it doesn't fit the media's narrative that a pro-gun Second Amendment concealed carrier stopped another violent event. But if you pay enough attention, you will see them pop up all over the internet of these different stories where this occurs on a daily basis, where somebody who's a legal, law-abiding citizen carrying a firearm protected themselves or other people with that firearm. That's what we need to be concentrating on as a country, is that we do care about each other. And I've said this 100 times. I'll leave it at this, and we'll wrap it up. I know Alex wants to get out of here.
No.
But I'll wrap it up with this. It doesn't matter if you want my guns or if you don't want my guns, if you like me or you don't like me. If the government or anyone else tries to step on your way of life, whether you're black, you're white, you're male, you're female, whether you're a U.S. citizen or not, if somebody is trying to take your civil liberties, me and mine will come for you and yours, period. We will be there with our guns to protect you and your rights. So you can talk all the smack you want about wanting to take them, but you can rest assured that even throughout this discussion, every single one of my friends and I all fully know that if tomorrow the government decided to come and say anyone with brown hair needs to go to these camps, we'll load up and we'll be there to stop it. Even though those people with brown hair may want our guns gone, we will be there to protect, to make sure that that can't occur. And don't tell me it doesn't happen, because in World War II, we subjugated the entire Japanese population and put them into internment camps. Not concentration camps, there's a difference. We put them into internment camps because we didn't know if we could trust them. Japanese citizens of the United States of America were put into camps. It happens, and it can happen, and it may happen again. But that's why I'm
Our
so
government
passionate.
does crazy stuff, man. They put acid in the water to see what it does to a town. Like, these are... The amount of asinine things our government does, and then they go, oh, you're a crazy conspiracist. It's like, no, I read, is what it is. Unfortunately, I just know too many things I probably shouldn't know for my mental health.
Right.
But, okay, this was a great conversation. Like you said, it will continue, and I can't wait to have you on again. But I have this kind of, I usually end with either fun jokes, would you rathers, or I've had these things to ponder. And I thought... I had Zach Strutzinger and Kim give me an answer on this one. They were both very different, and I think I know what your answer will be. However, I thought this would be the most appropriate person to ask and the best podcast to ask it.
Sure.
So, you're in your situation, you're either working at like a deli, or you are in... I don't like posing to a gun person, you're in your own home, because that really changes it for their perspective.
Right.
But... to me, that was the more realistic one. So, two situations. You're either you're a clerk at a deli, or you are in your own home. And I don't know if you have a gun or not. I want to hear how it comes out either way. You do have a gun or you don't.
Yeah.
But someone pulls out a gun to your head or comes up behind you and goes, give me all the money. Either all the money in your cash register or give me all the money you have in your home or get all your jewelry. Some shit like that. My question is... what do you do? What do you do? Like, you as somebody who's an aficionado of guns, I'm a second-degree black belt, and I know I'm not about to, take the gun. Like, it's just not about to happen. If anything, I'm dropping a log in my pants and taking whatever they give me. Yeah. So, my question is, if you ever find yourself in this very rare situation, I don't think we have ever, as a society, talked out, like, this is what we know it'll never happen, but if you catch on fire, what you do is you stop. Drop and roll. So it's like, why do I know what to do in that random situation, but I have no clue what to do when somebody comes to me with a gun? So I'm wondering what happens. What are you doing?
So if I'm the employee of the deli in that situation, or even if I'm in my own home, for me it's very different because of my background and my training. There's 100 different questions I need to know. So how many people are present? What type of weapon do I believe he has? Have I had a chance to view the weapon, or do I just feel it against the back of my head? Where am I in the store in relation to the points of entry and egress? In my home, where am I in relation to my firearms? Do I have one on me? Is my wife home? Are other family members home? All these questions need to go into a solid threat analysis, because as I remind people when I was training them, if you screw up, you've added a weapon to the fight, and it's no longer in your care, control, and custody. So now someone who maybe just had a BB gun is able to subdue you and take your real gun. Now you've got a problem, because he's gone from having a BB gun to a real gun. It's got real.
Right.
So the one thing I'll tell you, this is something each of you needs to think about over time and make a decision. My advice is always comply. Do what they want. Until you believe you've reached a point where you feel your life is in an imminent danger. Now, for some people, that's when that gun touches the back of their head. I mean, I can see it both ways. Until I have some more definitive information as to am I likely to survive this, comply. Give them what they want. 99% of people who come to commit a violent crime like that are after your money or your belongings. Give them the money and your belongings. Yeah. Do what they ask, comply, break contact as soon as possible, and then secure yourself. It's not worth your life. When I worked in retail, I had to get this point across to my 40-plus stores in Kentucky and West Virginia. We're insured. My wife and I have home insurance for a reason. So if I get robbed and they take everything of value, sorry about your luck, home insurance, but you're cutting me a check and I'm getting my stuff back.
Right.
So nothing is worth it. You can't be replaced, though. The knowledge of your setting, this is something that we talk about in firearms training. It's called situational awareness. Knowing where you are, knowing what's around you, knowing what's at your disposal, having a plan in place. Some people call it hypervigilance. It can be a negative thing, but if you use it for the positive aspects, it's phenomenal. When I go to a restaurant, I prefer to sit with my back so that I can see the doorway. I want to know who's entering and exiting, because most likely I'll pick up on a threat before the threat really materializes. So at least I have an opportunity to, in that split second, make a decision. Well, as I was walking in, I know where I'm sitting. So I know what the closest points of egress are. I also know what the closest points of cover and concealment are. So in the event that I need to take some sort of definitive action and draw my firearm and deploy that platform, I already have in my mindset, where do I need to go? When I go places with my wife, the whole time I'm thinking, as much as I want to help people, my first and only concern is extricating my wife from that situation. That's it. So if we're at the mall and something happens, I may be an EMT, I may be a firefighter, I may be a concealed carrier. I'm not going after a shooter. I'm getting my wife to the vehicle, I'm getting her the keys, and she's pulling out of the parking lot. Once I know she's safe and secure, now I can reassess. I can pull out my phone, I can call 911, I can attempt to re-enter the building to try to get eyes on the shooter, to communicate to 911 dispatch what type of weapons I'm seeing, what type of ammunition, what type of loadout do they appear to have, what direction are they heading, what type of systematic shooting system are they using, are they taking targets of opportunity, or are they specifically heading in a one set direction, not paying attention to targets of opportunity. These things all come into the threat analysis for me to understand what actions do I need to take. They train law enforcement nowadays for active shooters to get in and get engaged. The reason for that is statistics show the more time that an active shooter gets unconfronted, the higher the death count goes, the body count goes up. So the point for law enforcement is, as crappy as that is, while everyone else is screaming and running for their lives, load up, strap up, and get into the fight. They teach you as well that if you can just see the shooter's foot around a door frame, they teach you to shoot at the foot. They teach you to do anything you can to take that shooter's attention off of soft targets, shift it to a hard target. You want them thinking about you, as crappy as it is, you want that person thinking, I'm going to shoot that son of a gun. At least the rounds are being put at someone with some training and some background, while soft targets may be able to extricate themselves from the area.
Wow.
There's things that you don't think about as to what your plans will be.
Right.
It's 2019. You need to start thinking about these things. And for me personally, I have plans on places I go. I do these analysis in a split second. I know how many people generally are in a room. I know what clothing they're wearing. I just called, it was probably, what was it? Yeah, the end of, or the middle of last semester, the end of last semester, I called public safety because there was a male subject that was out walking on campus wearing a heavy winter coat and a winter hat, and it was 75 degrees outside. Extremely strange clothing, extremely strange behavior, and he's on our law school campus. From my standpoint and my training, major red flags. Well, public safety on our campus, who are unarmed, had to go confront this guy and just kind of have a conversation with him. Now, I stood by in my truck because if something happened, at least I've got a 4,000-pound weapon underneath my right foot to try to help our public safety who might get hurt or killed.
Right.
But these are things that people don't think about is if you see someone walking like that, are you going to look twice at them? Most people probably not. And so this case, just so you guys know, that case was actually very interesting because he was a citizen from Syria or somewhere with a desert culture, and he was freezing at 75 degrees.
Really?
So, and I mean, when the Susquehanna Regional Police showed up and made contact with him, it was like a 5-minute conversation. They said goodbye and, told him, like, you do us a favor, don't walk on campus anymore because it's private property. But when I talked to Susquehanna Regional Police Department afterwards, they told me, yeah, he's from an arid environment. This is cold to him. So, and it makes sense because I have buddies who've been in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they said there's nothing worse than going from 120-degree heat in the day to 70-degree heat at night, and you're like, what? But you think about the shift in temperatures, 50-degree fluctuation.
Wow.
Doesn't matter how hot or how cold, that's going to be freezing to you when your body's adjusted one way or the other. So these are things that people don't think about. If any of my classmates or anyone out there would like some advice on this stuff or would like to talk about it more in depth, by all means, I'm open to the conversations. I'm open to working with you guys so that you can get some understanding. If there's anyone out there who has never shot firearms and wants to get out there and shoot firearms, reach out to me. I'd love to take you. One of my favorite things in the world is to take people who have no knowledge and provide them knowledge. Because if nothing else, you'll have the opportunity then to speak from a position of power. Ignorance is a dangerous thing in this world, and people without knowledge are ignorant. So if you take some time to educate yourself and actually get a chance to shoot firearms and see what the firearms and shooting industry is really like, I'm pretty confident the vast majority of you will change your views to understand that, you know what, this is an interesting and a fun hobby for people to do. I see and I understand the draw. I understand why people want to own firearms, and I understand why they should be able to own firearms.
Right. Well, hey, last question. This one quick. I'm just curious. As somebody who has a background in law enforcement and everything, why are police officers allowed to say the F word?
Well, I think it comes down to the fact that you can't regulate the word to come out of people's mouths. And the biggest thing is...
But you can't say that as a lawyer. You definitely can't say that in any profession. There is no office you get to get away with that.
Well, the difficult part is we don't deal with the adrenaline dump like law enforcement will.
That's fair, too.
So when you have that initial fight or flight, the autonomic response, all of the blood goes from your extremities to your central core organs, your soft tissue organs. You lose finite motor skills, being able to work your hands, your feet won't work as well. You'll notice that sometimes in situations where officers have dash cams, they trip over seemingly nothing. That's fight or flight. The adrenaline pulls the blood from their extremities and they lose finite motor skills. With that being said, with that adrenaline dump comes the natural response of you're probably going to drop some F-bombs at people. Is it professional? Not in the least bit. Is it necessary? No. Do I hate it when I see it? Absolutely. Why? Because unless you've been in that situation where you've had a suspect pull a weapon on you, or you've been in a situation where you're fighting multiple suspects by yourself, and it turns into essentially a life or death struggle. Unless you've been there on the receiving end of that kind of critical incident, you don't know what it's like to try to maintain control over the incident.
But the only problem I have with that response is that we just had you're on a current case right now, and we just discussed earlier before the podcast how, we need to also acknowledge what being chased by a cop does to a person, right?
Sure.
So I think if we're trying to disarm someone, we're trying to, get them to cooperate, dismantle their energy, whatever it is, like bring them down to a manageable level. It seems like while there's 100% validity behind the biology of all this. Like, I say the F word just when I get excited about talking about a movie, right? Sure. I get that. However, I feel like, again, the higher standard for cops that I believe in, it's like there's nothing that's going to provoke us. I have a very, very low standard of expectations for civilians because I don't expect much from them. So when you have a civilian and the power, right, in their world. Like, there's nothing more socially powerful than an officer. You are already terrified.
Sure. You're at a heightened state of anxiety upon any contact with
and I feel like when they're screaming, get the F on the ground, get F, or that only makes them less likely to cooperate and makes them more likely to act out of any kind of aggression or anything else. So I feel like it only provokes and promotes this adverse behavior we're trying to negate out of these people.
And one of the best things, my father was in law enforcement for over 45 years. He ended his time as a supervisor for a sheriff's office up in Maine. One of the things that when I got into the field and I started working with these incidents where I'm fighting with people nonstop and I'm having to work with people, he summed it up in a way that I didn't expect from him because to me it was an extremely intellectual situation and conversation. But the easiest way he summed it up is, when someone has contact with law enforcement, like you just said, their anxiety is at a high. No matter if they've done something wrong or they haven't, something has spurred them to need you. Their anxiety is high. Do you want to walk in and add anxiety to an already heightened anxiety state? No. So as he put it to me, you have to be the one who is under control at all points and times because your actions will add or detract anxiety from an already volatile situation. And that's one thing I've always tried to keep in mind when I'm dealing with people. Throughout my years, people who've been around me in these situations, it becomes a running joke because of how calm, clear, and well I communicate in those situations. And it's because I'm very practiced in understanding that even if someone's yelling at me, calling me names, if I return that, I've amped up my level of force, which means they may amp up their level of force, which means I have to amp up my level of force. It's a slippery slope. versus if you come in and you talk to somebody. Now, there's hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officers in this country who are phenomenal at this. One of the things I've been noticing recently, especially with the body cam era, is you see these videos of officers who are confronted with mentally ill subjects who have a weapon clearly visible, a gun, a knife, some sort of weapon clearly visible, walking at the officer defiantly, screaming, "Kill me, shoot me, do it now, shoot me." And you'll hear these officers a lot of times, once the situation has evolved for a few seconds and they realize and they have a chance to compute what's going on, you'll hear the change in their voice. You'll hear them bring their volume down, their tone down, and they will say, please. They will say, please don't do this. Please stop. To me, that's heartbreaking, because if you step back and think about it, this is a human being who readily acknowledges the fact that they're about to take another human being's life if they don't stop. And they're not telling them stop because I'm in charge. They're telling them stop, please. I don't want to have to do this. I don't want to end your life. But if you continue to advance and put me in a situation where I have no choice, I'm going home to my family, period. Right. You won't, I will. And that's the thing that we see nowadays in the modern justice system. We're shifting away from this what do they call it? Stormtrooper, the stormtrooper view of law enforcement. So even when I was younger growing up, I always was aggravated. You can't have facial hair. You can't have tattoos below the elbow. Nowadays, my buddy works for a department down in Kentucky. They just put out an SOP that they allow full sleeve tattoos. He was joking, but he was actually serious, that all the tattoo parlors in town just got thousands of dollars of business as soon as that SOP was signed, because he went out literally within 2 weeks and had a sleeve done that he's always wanted done. But he didn't do it because it wasn't allowed in law enforcement. Wow. But again, you allow this personal aspect of who these men and women are to come forward, you start seeing better results. I'll never make excuses for police officers who do their job and do it poorly. They need to be held accountable the exact same anybody else is held accountable for their decisions. But I do implore people, if you have an opportunity to go do ride-alongs, to go do that, to see how the officer interacts. And most likely at some point in the night, you'll get the experience of responding code 3 or signal 9, depending on your jurisdiction, lights and sirens. You'll get a chance in the passenger seat to experience what officers experience on a daily basis of, you get a hot call, you're in the middle of probably enjoying coffee or lunch or something, and suddenly you're thrown into the middle of a very, very dynamic situation. And you're responding, and the radio's blaring, your sirens are ripping, the lights are blinking and reflecting off buildings, you're clearing intersections and traveling at 3 times the posted speed limit. All these things are going on, the officer's maintaining control of, while also listening to radio traffic to understand, what am I getting into when I arrive? And you get all this adrenaline. Just you as a passenger, you know full and well you're not getting out of that vehicle. You will stay in that vehicle no matter what. You are to stay put. But even knowing that, you will see a definitive rise in your blood pressure, your heart rate, and your respiration rate, because adrenaline kicks in.
Okay.
You're a part of this. And so if you get a chance to experience that and then watch the officer get out, and if you can listen and hear how they interact with people, I have a feeling you'll be shocked, because you'll be sitting there and you'll be breathing fast, things will be hot and heavy, but you'll be watching this officer almost calm as could be. Hey, what's going on? Tell me what happened. Okay. Well, why did that happen? Where is he at now? You'll see all these questions coming out in a normal course of conversation. Be aware, they're feeling the exact same effects you are. Right. Their adrenaline's through the roof. Their anxiety is high because they're going to a priority call, but they maintain the control because they're used to that and they know that they have to be in control.
And again, the terrible part is that's the vast majority of police officers, and we had this conversation earlier about how it just takes one bad egg to kind of spoil at least the perception for all. But one thing, again, the one egg in the bunch, it is, I don't know, in my personal experience with my family and how they've experienced police, and me personally, and then also videos you see online, which you can't base that off of any population. That's just the anomalies, but still they exist. That is how you get things done, right? Talking to someone calm, suppressing, you're, like you said, you're feeling the same anxieties, but that's what makes you stronger than them. That's what makes you more socially valuable than them. You are able to suppress that and get to the root of the matter. And most police officers can do that, and they do a great job of that. But what stinks is you see more and more police officers going like, shut up. And it's like, it's just so, like, that's the maximum aggression. And it's almost like, I'm not saying it's an industry standard, but it's also seeming like it's an industry, the industry kind of just looks the other way. Like, this is something we all do. Like, it's not something we encourage, but you can do it. Right. And so there are instances where it's just like, it's just a regular, they had a bad day. Whatever. We're all human. Sure. And again, what are we going to do? We're not going to make robots. So until we have RoboCop coming through, we got to just acknowledge they're humans. They're going to have human flaws. Right. But it does kind of feel like it's kind of I don't like using this word because it doesn't illustrate it enough. But it seems like it's kind of allowed. Like, it's just kind of the way we do our job of like, yes, keep your cool when you can, but if you don't, we also know that you don't have to. So it's just an interesting situation.
Well, you need to be aware too that when these situations occur, oftentimes behind the scenes there are write-ups that occur. There's official punitive action that goes against the officer for their candor on scene of an incident. But it depends on the situation. I mean, if you're talking about someone who's actively shooting or trying to kill an officer,
yeah, that standard's way lower.
They won't be held accountable for anything that comes out of their mouth short of racial or ethnic slurs. Beyond that, they're trying to survive. But on the flip side of that, I've seen situations, 100%. I've been part of situations where officers have mishandled situations or investigations initially, and it's caused issues. At the end of the day, all you can do is your part as a citizen and reach out. Now, I will tell you that the vast majority of law enforcement agencies across the nation have complaint systems in place, and they are followed through. I know a lot of people think it's a thin blue line. The running joke in law enforcement has been the IAD, Internal Affairs Division or Internal Affairs Bureau, for a long time. They're called the Rat Squad because their job is to follow up on any civilian complaints against officers. And they investigate police officers the exact way officers investigate John Q. Citizen. So that means that a lot of times cops aren't big fans of the Internal Affairs Division because a lot of times, even on unfounded complaints, there's still an official letter placed in the officer's jacket. Even though they didn't do anything wrong, there is a summary of the investigation that states they didn't do anything wrong, but now in that officer's jacket for the rest of his career, he's got an IAD flag with a summary of the investigation riding with him. So these are followed through. I've dealt with situations and I've taken up for law enforcement more times than I can count. They're not perfect. They make mistakes. If you really have an issue with it, you need to wait for the appropriate time and venue. If you don't agree with it with a judge's ruling in a courtroom, you're not going to flip the table over and tell him he's a piece of crap and tell him he needs to go in a corner and die. You're going to accept the judgment as entered and make notification on the spot, Your Honor, we intend to file an appeal. It'll be on the record that the appeal is coming, and you file your appeal thusly and bring it to the correct jurisdiction so that they can hear your side of it to make a decision on what to do. It's no different. Now, I'm at a disadvantage in this conversation because I am a white male. I don't know what it feels like to be a black male or a black female or a brown male or a brown female. I don't know what it feels like to be one of these, quote, minorities who feels like they've been victimized. All I can tell you is to keep in mind that these are good men and women who do a very difficult job. At the end of the day, they're trying to protect the community, and the community includes you. If you really feel you've been wronged, on the side of the road during a traffic stop is not the venue to try to petition for them to change their life. As crappy as it is, you got to comply. And, Kentucky has a law that it is illegal for you to use any level of force to resist arrest, even a wrongful arrest. And I've discussed this with people when I used to teach classes down there. I don't know if I'm man enough to, let's say for no reason I'm pulled over, and the officer grabs me by the throat, yanks me out the window, and starts beating the shit out of me. Oh, sorry. Beating the hell out of me. I don't know if I'm man enough to lay there and take a beating when I know I can defend myself. But as soon as I defend myself, I've broken the law. You are not allowed to defend yourself. You need to allow them to exercise their control over you. And then on the back end, you file your appeals, you file lawsuits. You have to take what occurs at the time. I don't know if I'm man enough to do it. I hope I am. I hope I'm never in the situation. But I hope if something like that occurs, I can maintain my cool. I don't know what people go through. All I can tell you is I feel for you, and there are remedies that are available, and I implore you to take advantage of them. I've met very few law enforcement agencies in my time on this planet who do not take allegations of wrongdoing seriously. From the chief of police or the sheriff all the way down to John Q. Citizen, who is on patrol on a regular basis, they care about everything that is told to them. They will investigate it as fully as they can. And there's remedies out there that are available for you. If you really have been wronged and you don't believe that the jurisdiction handled it correctly, you have the state attorney general's office that you can turn to. That would be the next appropriate point to lodge a formal complaint against the department for mishandling an allegation of wrongdoing. It's out there. Again, I'm talking from cloud nine because I have this, quote, white privilege. I also have a very unique way of interacting with law enforcement. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, every single one of them thinks I'm a police officer. It's all about...
You do have that way about you, though. It's crazy.
I do, and I've had it for years, and I understand that. But when I get pulled over, I got pulled over at a DUI checkpoint over the summer, 2 o'clock in the morning coming back from a bar I was bouncing at. I had my firearm on me. They stopped me. They say, "Hey, how are you?" I said, "I'm good." I said, "Listen, we're in DUI checkpoint." I said, "Absolutely, I understand." They said, "Where are you coming from?" I said, "I work at Bridges Social Club." They're like, "Oh, okay, you're one of the security guys." "Yep, I am." They're like, "Okay, great. You had anything to drink?" "No, sir, I didn't have anything to drink." I said, "Listen, I do need to make you aware that I do have a loaded weapon on my right hip right now." That officer started stuttering. He didn't know what to do. So I had to put my hands up. "Hey, take a breath. Relax. I'm letting you know I have a loaded weapon on my right hip. You tell me what you want, and we'll do that." Again, still stuttering, didn't know what to do. Supervisor behind me steps over and says, "What's going on?" So without moving my hands, I look over and I tell him the same thing. I said, "I advised your officer, I'll advise you now. I have a loaded weapon on my right hip." He said, "Okay, is it in a holster?" "Yes, sir, it is." "Is it easy for me to take out?" "Yes, sir, it is. I can walk you through it." I told him how to remove the holster. He took it from me, had me pull my bike up off to the side. I waited like 10 minutes. The only complaint I had and the issue I had was I did discuss this with some higher-ups at Harrisburg City Police Department. That weapon changed hands like 5 times between it being taken from me and it being handed back to me. It changed hands like 5 times. Major, major concerns. Because that was a loaded weapon. One person should have been in care, control, and custody from the time it was revoked from me, from the time it was handed back, instead of passing it around like it was a torch. So that was the only thing, the only negative instance I had. But I was stopped at a DUI checkpoint. That could have gone badly. Why didn't it? Because I remained in control, and I very, very calmly informed the officer that I have a weapon. I'm a licensed carrier. There's nothing wrong with it, but I'm having contact with law enforcement. They need to be aware that there is a weapon, so I tell them there's a weapon. These things happen across the board, daily basis in the U.S. It depends on you and your accountability as to whether or not things will end up well for you. To each their own. I just implore, I'm huge on communication. So, again, if anyone has any questions or comments, by all means, reach out to me. I'd love to discuss this more with you guys.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you for having me in. I'd love to discuss more with you in the future.
This was so great. Honestly, I want to thank Andre, Trey, Johnny, Chase. You guys had some really great responses. That was really great. I mean, that was probably the best content we had. Gave us a good platform to start with. Guys, please, if you enjoyed this, and honestly, spread the good word, because I think these are the conversations that need to be heard, and they'll start and provoke even greater conversations. So if you enjoyed it, please share and hit a like. Find us on Facebook, the Rethink Tanks now, and we're now on Twitter. So go check those out. And guys, thank you again. Wayne, till next time, brother. We will get you on here again soon.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to it.
Yes. Thanks, guys. Peace.
Deuces.